In 1894, two empires were on a collision course for control of Korea. Both were armed with the world's newest ironclad warships. The battle that followed in the Yellow Sea wouldn't just be the largest naval fight of the First Sino-Japanese War, it would be a brutal proving ground for modern naval tech, a fight that would sink the fortunes of China's Qing dynasty and announce the arrival of Imperial Japan as a world power. This is the story of the Battle of the Yalu River. In the last decades of the 19th century, East Asia was a region in turmoil. The old order, with Qing dynasty China as the undisputed top dog, was starting to come apart at the seams. For centuries, Korea's Joseon dynasty had been a loyal ally to China, a cornerstone of its regional power. But across the sea, something new was stirring. Japan, having thrown off the old Tokugawa shogunate, was rocketing through an unprecedented period of modernization under the Meiji Restoration. Its leaders watched with alarm as Western powers carved up China into spheres of influence, and they vowed that Japan would not suffer the same fate. No, Japan would join the ranks of the imperial powers. Korea, with its strategic location and rich reserves of coal and iron, was the obvious first step for Japan's ambitions. The peninsula was seen as a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan. In the hands of a rival, it was an existential threat. For China, keeping its grip on Korea was a matter of prestige and security, vital for holding its massive empire together. A clash was inevitable. All it needed was a spark. That spark came in 1894 with the Donghak peasant rebellion in Korea. When the Korean king couldn't crush the revolt, he called on his traditional patron, China, for help. Chinese troops entered the peninsula. Japan called this a violation of their agreements and sent its own forces into Korea in response. The First Sino-Japanese War had begun. The conflict was a contest for the future of Asia, but more than that, it was a test. It would pit China's self-strengthening movement against Japan's Meiji Restoration, two rival ideas of modernization, brought to life by two brand-new, modern navies. On paper, many observers expected China to win. It had been modernizing longer, spent more money, and seemed to have the more powerful fleet. The pride of the Qing dynasty was the Beiyang, or Northern, Fleet. Its commander was Admiral Ding Ruchang, a former cavalry officer with no formal naval training. The heart of his fleet was two colossal, German-built ironclad battleships, the Dingyuan and the Zhenyuan. At over 7,000 tons and armed with massive 12-inch guns, these were the most powerful ships in Asia, seemingly able to outmuscle anything the Japanese could throw at them. They were symbols of China's industrial might, a declaration that the sick man of Asia was healing. But under that iron skin, the fleet was sick. Corruption was rampant in the late Qing Empire. Money meant for the navy was famously siphoned off by officials, including the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi, to fund lavish projects like rebuilding the Summer Palace. Factionalism split the officer corps, with rival cliques fighting for influence instead of practicing maneuvers. Because of this, training was a mess, and maintenance was ignored. The fleet had critical shortages of gear, especially modern ammunition. Many shells for their big guns were the wrong type, filled with cement instead of explosives, or were just too old to work. It was a fleet that looked incredible at anchor but had been rotted from within. Facing them was the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, under Vice Admiral Itō Sukeyuki. A veteran samurai, Itō was a professional, experienced naval officer, and so were most of the men under him. Unlike the Chinese, the Japanese had built their navy around a single command structure and a clear strategy, heavily influenced by the French Jeune École or the young school of thought. This doctrine prized speed, maneuverability, and new, quick-firing guns. The Japanese fleet didn't have anything to match the raw size and armor of the Chinese battleships. Their flagship, the Matsushima, and its sister ships were protected cruisers, faster, but with less armor. Their real advantage was their guns. While the Chinese relied on heavy, slow-firing cannons, the Japanese cruisers had more modern, rapid-firing guns. These fired smaller shells but could unleash a much greater volume of fire, aiming to shred enemy crews and tear apart the unarmored parts of their ships with a storm of high-explosive rounds. The Japanese Navy was a reflection of the Meiji state, unified, professional, ruthlessly efficient, and hungry to prove itself. The stage was set. In the waters of the Yellow Sea, these two fleets, embodying two radically different paths to modernity, would finally meet. The battle would provide a brutal, definitive answer to the question of which path was the right one. On September 17, 1894, 2 days after a decisive Japanese victory on land at the Battle of Pyongyang, the moment of truth arrived at sea. The Chinese Beiyang Fleet under Admiral Ding was escorting troop transports to the mouth of the Yalu River, a vital supply line for Chinese forces in Korea. The mission was a reluctant one. The Qing court, scared of risking its prized warships, had still insisted the convoys go on, forcing a fight Admiral Ding wanted to avoid. Just as the Chinese fleet finished its escort duty, smoke was spotted on the horizon. The Japanese combined fleet had found them. Admiral Ding tried to form his fleet into a line abreast, a formation meant to bring the big guns of his battleships to bear. But his fleet was a motley crew of ships with different speeds, and the formation was a disorganized mess. The two Titans, Dingyuan and Zhenyuan, formed the core, but they were flanked by older, weaker cruisers like the Xiaoyong and Yangwei. To make things worse, a freak accident on the bridge of his own flagship, the Dingyuan, wounded Admiral Ding and several of his staff before a single shot was fired at the enemy, sowing confusion in the Chinese command from the very start. The Chinese opened fire first, from an extreme range of nearly 6,000 meters. Their shells hit the water but were inaccurate and ineffective, a total waste of their already limited ammunition. In stark contrast, Admiral Itō ordered his fleet to hold its fire. The Japanese ships just steamed ahead, closing the distance for a full 20 minutes while Chinese shells fell harmlessly around them. Itō's plan was simple and brilliant. He would use his fleet's superior speed to refuse a head-on brawl with the powerful Chinese battleships. He was going to dictate the terms of this fight. He split his force, sending his fastest ships, the Flying Squadron, to slash across the front of the slower Chinese fleet and smash its weak right flank. The main fleet, led by Itō, would follow, concentrating its fire on the vulnerable ships at the edge of the Chinese line. At around 3,000 meters, the Japanese guns erupted. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Flying Squadron, led by the cruiser Yoshino, moved at nearly twice the speed of the Chinese ships, overwhelming the cruisers on the right of Ding's formation. The Xiaoyong and Yangwei, ships with wooden parts coated in a thin layer of varnish, were instantly engulfed in flames under the hail of Japanese high-explosive shells. The flammable paint used on many Chinese ships proved to be a fatal flaw, turning them into floating infernos. Within an hour, both cruisers were gone, sinking beneath the waves. The battle became a whirlwind of smoke, fire, and steel. The Japanese squadron circled the Chinese fleet, their rapid-firing guns pouring a non-stop stream of shells into their targets. The Japanese gunnery was disciplined and deadly. Their big guns focused on the two main Chinese battleships, while the smaller, faster cannons tore the superstructures of the other cruisers to pieces, sweeping their decks and killing their crews. And yet, the Chinese fought back with desperate courage. The two giant battleships, Dingyuan and Zhenyuan, proved almost unsinkable. Their thick German armor held up against the barrage of smaller Japanese shells. They moved through the battle like wounded giants, soaking up immense punishment while their heavy Krupp guns fired back, searching for a killer blow. The cruiser Jeune, under the heroic Captain Ding Ruchang, charged straight at the Japanese flying squadron in a desperate attempt to ram the Yoshino. Riddled with shells, the Jeune went down with her captain and most of her crew, an act of defiance that became legendary. The Japanese didn't escape unharmed. The Chinese battleships, though slow-firing, could inflict horrific damage when they hit. The Japanese flagship Matsushima took a direct hit from one of the Zhenyuan's 12-inch shells. The massive round tore through the unarmored ship and hit an ammunition store. The explosion killed or wounded over 100 men, more than half the crew, and forced Admiral Itō to transfer his flag to another ship. The old Japanese corvette High-A, unable to keep up, blundered through the center of the Chinese line and was so badly damaged it had to retreat. The gunboat Akagi also suffered heavy casualties under a focused Chinese attack. But these were small victories against an overwhelming tide. As the afternoon dragged on, the superior training, tactics, and technology of the Japanese proved decisive. The Chinese fleet was in chaos. 5 of their warships were sunk or sinking. Fires raged on the surviving ships. Ammunition was critically low. The battle had lasted for over 5 hours, one of the first great showdowns between modern, all-steel warships. By nightfall, Admiral Ding, out of ammo and stunned by the brutal reality of modern naval war, had no choice but to gather his surviving ships and retreat. The battle was over. Japan had won a crushing victory. As the smoke cleared over the Yellow Sea, the scale of the disaster for the Qing dynasty was terrifyingly clear. 5 major Chinese warships had been sunk, with the rest heavily damaged. Around 850 Chinese sailors were killed and 500 were wounded. The Japanese, on the other hand, lost no ships. Though 4 of their vessels were severely damaged, their fleet was still a fighting force. Their casualties were far lighter, with about 180 killed and 200 wounded. The immediate result was a catastrophe for China. The surviving ships of the Beiyang Fleet limped back to the fortified harbor of Weihaiwei. Admiral Ding's force, once the nation's pride, was now trapped and blockaded by the victorious Japanese Navy. This single battle gave Japan total command of the sea for the rest of the war. With the sea lanes secure, Japan could now freely move troops and supplies to the mainland, reinforcing their armies in Korea and opening new fronts in Manchuria and China itself. The land war, already going badly for China, was now simply unwinnable. The defeat sent shockwaves through the Qing government and around the world. European newspapers ran front-page stories, crediting Japan's victory to its shockingly fast and successful adoption of Western technology and methods. The battle was a brutal, public humiliation that exposed the weakness of the once mighty Chinese Empire. For decades, China's self-strengthening movement was built on the idea that you could adopt Western tech to preserve a traditional Confucian state. The Battle of the Yalu River proved that idea disastrously wrong. A modern navy was more than modern ships, it needed a modern state to support it, one free of crippling corruption, infighting, and rot. Japan had built that state, China had not. The final act for the Beiyang Fleet came a few months later. In early 1895, Japanese forces besieged the naval base at Weihaiwei by land and sea. Trapped, with no hope of rescue, the fleet's fate was sealed. Admiral Itō, the Japanese commander, offered his counterpart Admiral Ding asylum. Ding refused. Rather than surrender the fleet he commanded, he committed suicide by taking an overdose of opium in his headquarters. His deputy did the same, and what was left of the Beiyang Fleet, including the great battleships Dingyuan and Zhenyuan, was surrendered or scuttled. With this final act, 30 years of China's modernization efforts lay in ruins. In April 1895, a humbled China signed the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The terms were harsh. China had to recognize Korea's full independence, giving up centuries of influence. It also had to hand over Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula to Japan, and pay a massive war indemnity. Japan hadn't just won a war, it had replaced China as the dominant power in East Asia. The victory at the Yalu River announced its arrival on the world stage, a new and aggressive imperial power to be reckoned with. The battle shattered China's prestige and revealed its vulnerability, inviting more intervention from Western powers and speeding up the decline of the Qing dynasty. The Battle of the Yalu River was more than just a naval battle. It was a hinge point in modern history. It was a clash of cultures, a test of ideologies, and a brutal judgment on two empires. One, ancient and complacent, was exposed as a paper tiger, its modern facade crumbling to reveal the decay within. The other, ambitious and disciplined, proved its modernity with shellfire and steel, starting down a path of imperial expansion that would define the 20th century in the Pacific. If you'd like to explore more decisive moments in military history, from the end of the battleship to the rise of air power, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps us create more in-depth documentaries just like this one. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified of our next video. The ironclads that clashed at the Yalu River in 1894 have long since rusted away, but the echoes of their guns still reverberate. The battle was a stark lesson in the nature of power at the dawn of the industrial age, that technology without the right doctrine, training, and political structure is hollow. It confirmed the dramatic rise of Imperial Japan and sealed the fate of Qing China, redrawing the map of power in Asia and setting the stage for even greater conflicts to come. The Battle of the Yalu River was, in the end, the brutal birth of a new era. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.